Sustainable Development. So thank you very much to the participants that have been following us during the first week and are now with us again during the second week. I'm very pleased to introduce you today Baldassare Fronte. He's an Italian professor at the University of Pisa, and his team is aquaculture. And he's responsible for a department with a very interesting name, zebrafish facility. So I hope you will explain to us what is a zebrafish. Very interesting. So the focus of the lesson will be on aquaculture for food security and sustainable development, themes that of course are very central to the work of the Food and Agriculture Organization where I work. So without further ado, I am very pleased to give the floor to Baldassare, and I wish you a very interesting and good lesson. Thank you. Over to you, Baldassare.
Thank you very much. It's as I said, it's a pleasure to be here, and I would like to thank you, all the organizer of the course, and thank you for asking me to attend to give this speech. I'm really glad for that. And first of all, I would like to introduce myself. As Miss Rosa Laura said, I'm a professor at the University of Pisa. My major is aquaculture. I held 2 courses to the bachelor as aquaculture, and to the master course sustainable aquaculture. So still the focus is on aquaculture. And as Ms. Rosa Laura said, I'm also the responsible for the zebrafish facility. The zebrafish facility, it's a facility where we breed, raise zebrafish, Danio radio, which actually is not a fish of interest for the aquaculture sector, but it's an animal model, very, very modern, very advanced animal model, because it has a very low nervous system development, so it's really suggested for animal research. In my case, and zebrafish is really, really important in the research for human disease and human biology. And in my case, of course, I use the zebrafish as animal model for fish research, in particular aquaculture. It allows to get very quick results due to the short life cycle, and also to carry out very cheap research. So it enables to save money for research projects. So that's all about my introduction, let's say. So if you agree, if you don't have specific questions, I can start just sharing my screen, and I will introduce my presentation. Okay, I think everybody see now, and I will put, okay. Is everything okay? May I go ahead?
Yes, perfect. Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. So, as I said, my research field is mainly aquaculture, and recently means since 6-7 years ago, I started also to work on sustainability for our aquaculture, and that's why I'm here and presenting this topic. Just to start, it's important to, maybe you already know, you have been talking about that many times, I guess, but still is important to stress this point. I mean, the world demographic growth, because this is related with the food production worldwide. So the world demographic growth is characterized by a very fast increase in the world population since the 90s. But what is important is to tell that since 2,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago, the world population wasn't so large, but since the 90s, in only 150 years, the population grows tenfold. So this means there is a very important process that is changing the conditions in the human life conditions in the planet. And then these people need to be fed, so we have to ensure them food, availability of food for everybody. So we had to change our approach in producing food. Of course, this let's say phenomenon, it's bring with it with this the need of producing more food, but in a limited context. The planet is one, and the agriculture surface is limited. So there is a need of increasing the efficiency with who we are using the resources available in the planet. In relation to the fisheries and aquaculture, which is the topic of the lesson of today, the speech and my talk, we should know that since the 1950, the fish production worldwide wasn't approximately of about 20 million tons. FAO has done a very great job in finding all this data and collecting this data around the world and making a summary of what happened in the world. With this publication, World Fisheries and Aquaculture, the state of world fisheries and aquaculture collected all this data, and I let's say push everybody to read this publication, because it's really plenty of data and informations. Since the 50s, let's say, the world fish production has been increasing continuously until today, until in the 20s of this new century. And what we can see is that until 1985 and 1990, the production from catch is not growing anymore. It's quite stabilized, approximately around 80 million tons, despite the world production of fish is still growing, and this is due mainly to the aquaculture production. Nowadays, the share of production between catch and aquaculture is almost 50%. In relation to the marine, in relation to the aquaculture production, we should say also this aspect. No, sorry, not the aquaculture production, but the fish production worldwide. That the main production come from marine fish, while the production of inland waters, let's say freshwater fish, it's approximately 25%, 30% of the whole production. Okay, so still really important, really relevant is the production from marine fish. Still, this is important, really important. The comparison between fish production worldwide and meat production. This is a graph where the meat production is compared with the production of fish, and you can see among meat we have to say all the kind of meat of terrestrial animal production is included. So beef, chicken, dairy cows, I mean beef, pig, or pork, and chicken. So all the kind of the meat is included, and fish is not at all neglectable in comparison to the meat production, world meat production. You can see better this graph where the production of fish among all the total production of food from animal origin attain to 35%. So still the fish production as a source of food, it's really, really important, relevant. When we come to make an analysis more related to the regions, first of all, we have to highlight that China is the country that produce the largest quantity of fish. And what is typical in China is that more than, let's say, 70% of the production comes from aquaculture. So it's not anymore from catch, the blue part for 2011 to 2010 decades, to 2020 decades, but this production is mainly due to aquaculture. Still, aquaculture, it's really relevant in all the East Asia, okay, in all the countries of the Southeast Asia, mainly Thailand, Vietnam, where aquaculture is really important, is relevant, despite the catch of fish it's quite large. What is different in the other countries, in the other continents, Americas, Europe, Africa, Oceania? Still, the production of fish comes from the catch mainly, and just a small share come from aquaculture. From one point of view, we can say, okay, aquaculture in these countries is not still developed, but looking at China and what happened in East Asia, we see that a lot can be still done for improving aquaculture production in these countries, in these continents, Americas, Europe, Africa, and Oceania. Some information can be given also in relation to the products. We have several kind of classification, and mainly we can classify the product from the fish products, let's say in freshwater fishes and marine fishes. What we can observe is that when we talk about freshwater fish, so then trout, carp, catfish, this production comes mainly from aquaculture. While when we look at marine fish, the production of fish come mainly from catch. Okay, this is the main difference. Still, again, this suggests that it is possible to improve the aquaculture production of marine fish, and we will see this may help to make a more sustainable production and to produce more sustainable food. Another aspect is that when we don't look just to the marine fish and we go to look to other typology of products such as crustaceans, mollusks, or algae, the main production comes from aquaculture. Okay, so aquaculture still play a very important role in the production of fish and aquatic organisms in general. And this is something related to the let's say, consumers, because I would like to stress mainly the meaning of this line, this curve, which is the consumption of fish pro capita. So how much fish each citizen, each person consume per year. If we look at the 90s, the production, the consumption of fish was of about 9 kilo, let's say more, maybe more 80 kilo per person. Okay, this was in the 50s. When we come to more recent era, let's say 2018, 2020, the quantity of fish consumed by each citizen rised up to 21 kilo, so doubled. Okay, this means that each citizen is asking for more fish to consume, is asking for more fish. And this is come together with the growth of the population. So the population grew of about 5-6-fold since 150 years, and contemporaneously the consumption of fish per year doubled per person. Okay, from 9, now it's about 21. In some countries such as Italy, for instance, the pro capita consumption of fish is up to 30 kilo per person per year. So it's even higher than the mean value of the world population. This is really relevant, and it's important to understand the importance of producing more fish, and how the demand for fish is growing year by year, together with the increasing of per capita consumption and the increasing of the world population. One aspect I would like to highlight is also that the production of fish, which is the green and the blue one color worldwide, is mainly used for food, okay, to be consumed as food. But there is one share, this below, which is used not for food purposes. Okay, we will see what is this kind of destination, this kind of production. We will talk about this quote very soon. Again, just to summarize one aspect, I already told you about this. Since 1985 approximately, the fish, the catch of fish is stable, is not increasing. Okay, so the world fish production is increasing just thanks to the aquaculture production. This is important because actually the development of aquaculture for the future is still related to the catch of fish, and I will tell you why very soon. So the reason why the production of fish from catch, from the fisheries industry, is not rising anymore are several. One of the most important is the over fishing in the sea. Just give a look to this very interesting graph, still produced by FAO, that in 1974 we had just, let's say, 20% of the wild stock population overexploited. I mean, there was approximately 15-20% less than 20%, 15% of the wild stock population that were exploited more than their ability to recover, to reproduce, and naturally reproduce, and to come to the same amount, quantity in the sea. This was, let's say, just 10-15% of the wild stock fish in the 1974, not centuries ago, but just 45 years ago, approximately, we had this situation. What now? We can see in 2019, 2020, let's say, the number of, the quantity of wild population, wild stock population overfished increased very, very much, a lot. Now we have more than 25-30% of the wild stock populations unsustainably exploited. This means that there are several populations that are under pressure. Humans are catching more fish than the ability of the wild population to restore the original number of fish. This means this species, this wild stock population, are heading toward how can I say, extinction. Okay, so this is a very severe problem for the biological diversity of our seas. So due to this, okay, more in detail, let's say, I would like you, I think you come from all over the world, so an overview of what happened in the different regions of the world can be given over here, and each one of you can have a look of the situation in your country. Let's say if we talk about the Mediterranean, we can see that 64% approximately of the wild stock population in the Mediterranean, it's overexploited. This means that very quickly we are heading to the extinction of the species. So something have to happen. Okay, we have to change this the management of the wild stock populations, and the situation is not that better all over the world. Okay, maybe it's a bit better, but still we have large share of wild stock populations that are overexploited. So anyway, all these productions are unsustainable anymore. So we have to do something to change these conditions. That's why since long ago, since the 90s, let's say, the FAO started as a first public institutions, let's say, to push, to change the direction when they saw this clear sign of overexploitation and the risks connected with this situation, modification of ecosystem, economic losses of many countries that whose economy was based on fishery, So when they saw these risks, they start to make a new policy and start giving directions to the governments, local governments, to change the policy of the the exploitation of the seas. And in the same time, they suggested to change this approach from the catch of fish to the breeding of fish, to the aquaculture production, because in this case we can reproduce on our own the fish to be raised for food production. And in this case we are not going anymore to exploit the wild population of fish. So from this point of view, in the 90s, it was a kind of, let's say, wise decision, wise view. This policy was applied through the reduction of the fleets of several countries. So they, let's say, suggested to reduce the number of fleets used for catching fish and turning this production, this sector, into more sustainable aquaculture development. And this was, of course, for reducing the exploitation of wild stock, okay, meeting the rising protein requirement of world population. The population is growing, is asking for fish, so we have to produce fish to feed the population, and to guarantee healthy product and its traceability. The products from aquaculture are much more easily traceable and can be, let's say, more controlled from a sanitary point of view. And at the same time, aquaculture may be used as a very powerful tool for supporting the economy of underdeveloped countries and developing countries, of course. But at the same time, I would say aquaculture nowadays is supporting also the economy of developed countries, let's say, okay? At the same time, this kind of approach, I mean, reducing the fleets for vessel fleets for catching fish and increasing and enhancing the aquaculture production, it's in line with one of the more important, let's say, one of the 17 goals that the European Union has decided as to create a sustainable development of the economy and of all the European society, of course. So the life below water, it's one of this goal of sustainability established by the European government. But somehow you can understand why, I mean, I already said something. I said if we produce from aquaculture, actually we are not exploiting anymore the sea, so aquaculture is fine. But this is not the only reason why FAO and the European Union are, let's say, pushing to develop aquaculture production. There are other reasons, and I will try to explain very quickly this reason to understand why, at the end, aquaculture is among the animal productions one of the most sustainable. For example, this table describes how the energy supplied to an animal, these are the animal categories, okay, is converted into products. into food product. Okay, so if I provide energy with the food, with the feed to dairy herd, 12% of this energy will be turned into energy of the milk. Just to explain the meaning of this table. And similarly, this is the efficiency with who dairy herd transform the feed protein into product protein, protein of the milk in this case. And we can see what happened for all the other categories: sheep flock, beef cattle, pig herd, broilers, egg layers, and fish and shrimp. You can see fish and shrimp are the categories of animal that more efficiently convert the energy and the protein contained in the feed into products. Okay, this is one important reason. This means to make more efficient use of feed resources. But there is another reason, which is related to the land use. To produce food, it's necessary to have a large availability of surface suitable for agriculture, of course. So if we think about producing 20 kilo of protein to be used for human nutrition, 0.25%, 0.25 hectares are required to produce this 20 kilo of protein. If we produce protein from cereals, we need 0.6 hectares, 0.7 for potatoes, from 1 to 3, depending on the breed and the conditions of the soil, let's say, from 1 to 3 hectares to produce 20 kilo of protein, 3 for chicken and so on, coming up to the fish and shrimp production, where we need 0.1 hectare to produce 20 kilo of protein to be used for human nutrition. Again, as we saw for the conversion of energy and protein, the land used for fish and shrimp, in this case, is used more efficiently than when used for other purposes. This is mainly due to one fact, which is when we raise fish and shrimp, we use the third dimension. We can have very deep tanks, or let's say a pool, and but this estimation has been made. Sorry, I see there is another note. This is an estimation made with using a pond, a pond 1.5 meters deep. So we are not talking about offshore cages where the deepness of the cage can be even 25 meters. Okay, so in this case it's related to a pond of 1.5 meters deep. So it is let's say still underestimated rate. So this is the reason why aquaculture is considered as a valid, very interesting tool for food production and sustainable food production, because aquacultures enable the most efficient use of the resources, which in turn, this means producing fish and then food with the lowest carbon footprint possible among all the other species. Okay, so fish production has the lowest carbon footprint in animal food production. But what does this mean? Maybe someone can say, oh, why, great, we are the first of the class, we are the most clever. Okay, that's all. No, of course, the sustainability issue is really, really important. And everyone have to be in charge of improving the sustainability of every human activity. So even aquaculturists and the aquaculture sector can do something more, can reduce this index, the carbon footprint index, more than it is now. But how we can do? There is something that we can do to reduce let's say the impact of the aquaculture production. Yes, there are many ways, but I can summarize in these two the most important, let's say, the most easy to apply, which are these. First of all, we should improve the FIFO index. Maybe you are not familiar with aquaculture, but even though all around the world there is a wide production of herbivorous fish such as carp, for instance, or catfish, or tilapia, let's say, in the Western countries, and not only in the Western countries, a huge production of fish is related to carnivorous fish. And to produce this carnivorous fish, salmon is one of these, of course. In Italy we have sea bream, sea bass, turbot in France, many other species, carnivorous species, meager. It's necessary to use fish meal and fish oil, okay? Because they are carnivorous. So what happened right now? The fisheries industry catch forage fish. So it means fish of low interest for you as human food in the sea, to be transformed into fish meal and fish oil. And fish meal and fish oil are important ingredients of aqua feed. It means of the feed used for salmon, sea bream, sea bass, turbot, meager production. Okay? But this is quite nonsense, because we are going to catch fish from the sea again to raise, to feed aquaculture, fish of aquaculture production. Okay? Anyway, we will see better in the next slide. First, in the meanwhile, I would like to tell you that the other approach to improve the carbon footprint, or let's say the impact of the aquaculture, is to rethink the production processes according to the circular economy principles. So we have to change our approach from a linear approach of production, where we use some resources and we create some wastes, okay, that are really wasted, into a different approach where waste is not anymore wasted, but it becomes a source for another production processes. So the reuse of the wastes, it's really important and relevant. I will describe soon both this approach. Approach number one is improving the FIFO index, as we said. FIFO means fish in, fish out. It means how many, how much wild fish I have to catch and to transform into fish meal and fish oil to produce salmon or sea bream or carnivorous fish. So the first studies about this topic have been carried out on salmon. Nowadays there are many other studies carried out on other species, but at the beginning we saw that the ratio, the FIFO for the salmon production was of about 4.9, so means 5. 5 means we need to catch 5 kilo of fish to produce 1 kilo of salmon. Okay. Yes, salmon it's maybe pretty good, good fish. Consumers like it, but still, the 5 kilo we bought is still protein, are still protein, is still energy, are still omega-3 that can be used for human nutrition. So this makes something really not really nice and sustainable. So we had to change approach. And in the recent years, we have been working. To change this situation. So this is let's say a graph where the fish meal and fish oil production is still, you see, since 2001 to 2020 stable. As stable is the catch of fish. Okay, so fish meal and fish oil are limited resources. We cannot produce more fish because in the seas are overexploited. So there are no more enough fish to increase the fish meal and fish oil production. And just to let you know how much is important aquaculture to this aspect, in the 60s, fish meal and fish oil was produced for other purposes, poultry and pig production, but not for aquaculture. But since in the 1985, aquaculture started produce a lot of fish, so was increasing a lot. Almost all the fish meal and fish oil production is nowadays used for aquaculture purposes. So this material, these raw materials, fish meal and fish oil are really important. But as we said, we have limited quantity, availability of fish meal and fish oil. So to produce more aqua feed, to support the aquaculture development, we have been using many other raw materials, such as vegetable, plant-based ingredients, raw materials such as peas, soybean, and now we are experimenting also microalgae. Krill has been used as well. Okay. In the future, we can think about the use of insect meal as a protein source, very sustainable protein source for fish nutrition. Okay, this is very sustainable because insects are grown on wastes. So we transform wastes into protein to be used for human, why not, but mainly for fish production. And since 2017, EU enabled the use of insect meal in aqua feeds. But just a few topics, and we have done about the second approach. The second approach is to rethink the production process in the aquaculture field, because today we are talking about aquaculture field, but this can be considered also for other kind of sectors. And aquaponic is one of a new approach for aquaculture production. Then we have integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, as well as I would like to tell you about one project from University of Pisa, which is SynTap, and I will explain the details. The aquaponic approach take place, let's say, is born, okay, born from this kind of consideration. Studies have been suggesting that per each ton of fish produced from aquaculture, we create wastes containing nutrients enough to produce from 5 to 10 tons of vegetable, of plants, crop production, okay? So we have the wastes of the fish production may allow the production of 10 tons of plants, edible plants or edible products. And this is important. Until nowadays, when we produce fish, we are wasting resources that can be used to produce plants, okay? So aquaponic is a combination between RAS, recirculation aquaculture system, and hydroponic cultivation, soilless cultivation. This is another nice, very cool, very nice publication from FAO, small scale aquaponic food production. I invite you to have a look of this publication. It's really nice, very important, where fish production, okay, the water, the effluent of the fish production is used for fertilizing and produce nutrients for crop production. The crop, the plants growing in the hydroponic section remediate the water from the ammonia expelled by the fish, okay, so that the water can be reused. So this is a loop, a continuous loop, where no water is wasted, okay, and no nutrients are wasted, because fish waste are used for crop production. This cycle is allowed by the activity of some bacteria, in particular Nitrosomonas and Nitrobacter, that transform nitrates, ammonium into nitrates, and nitrates into nitrites, okay? And the plant can be used these products for their nutrition. One input, which is feed for fish, two outputs, fish and crop. Okay, this is an innovative perspective of the aquaponic, and you can see from these few pictures that aquaponic can have also large scale production, okay? Mainly nowadays this is related to the freshwater production, but when we turn into IMTA, integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, a similar approach can be used on a large scale, area scale, for producing also marine products. Again, integrated mariculture, very nice publication from FAO. This is not a spot advertisement. It's really, I really enjoyed this publication, and that's why I suggest these publications. And in the IMTA, we combine several kind of activities of farms, where the waste of a farm, for example, for instance, fish farm, are used in the sea, open offshore, let's say, from a mussel because the solid wastes of the fish can be filtered by the muscle, and the soluble wastes can be used by algae if we combine these farms according to the current and transport the wastes of one farm to another farm, a second farm. In the picture from the satellite, you can see where there is an aquaculture farm and mussel farm that take advantages of the wastes of the aquaculture farm, fish farm. Okay, this is another approach. And last but not least, something really innovative. Just consider this as a experimental, new, very new trend for the future, let's say, which is the Sinta project. It was a project funded by EU within the call Prima Call, and the project leader was University of Pisa with several other partners from France, Germany, Malta, and Turkey. Which this approach is a kind of combination. First of all, it's related to marine production, and it's inspired by the two approaches we have been talking about so far, IMTA and aquaponic. In this case, the idea is that every ecosystem has an innate capacity to produce biomass. If we go in a field or in the water, in the sea, thanks to the lights of the sun, okay, and the photosynthesis, every ecosystem is able to produce biomass, okay? Plants make photosynthesis, the plant grows, so the animals can feed these plants, and again, we have animal production in every ecosystem. Our idea is how we can exploit this innate ability of an ecosystem to produce biomass, food biomass, in a farm, okay? This is the challenge. So that's why in Pisa, at the University of Pisa, we established this kind of prototype where we have a section for fish production, a section for detritivorous filters feeders organisms, such as polychaetes, mussels, clams, shrimp, and so on, a filtration unit, and a hydroponic section where we raise plant, but mainly, basically, we start from the microalgae production. And in summarizing, we have the microalgae production, okay, that we harvest, we collect, and we supply to the detritivorous filter feeders, mussels, clams, shrimp, polychaetes, okay? Then we harvest such a production, okay? As I told you right now, clams, mussels, polychaetes, and we use this biomass for feeding fish, okay? Fish, again, produce two kinds of wastes, solid, which are in turn supplied through the water circle to the detritivorous filter feeders, so they reuse this kind of wastes. And the soluble wastes are let's say, conveyed toward the plant section and the filtration unit and the plant section to produce plants, okay? So this is a loop. And what is the valuable part of this product? That in this case, our production is totally locally based. We are not going to use soybean from Brazil, corn from America. We are not going to transport by trucks through the continents this raw material and through the ships overseas to be brought to the farm. With a large production of CO2 due to the carburant consumption. So we are avoiding all this part, just producing our feed in our prototype. This is the innovative part of the Synta project. That's all for my presentation. I spent quite 5-10 minutes more I expected, so I apologize if I'm long.
You are perfectly on time. Perfectly on time. Thank you, Baldassare. Thank you. That's perfect and extremely interesting and very relevant for, of course, FAO work that is focusing on food security. And so thank you for that. We have now 10 minutes for question and answer or for comments. Please raise your hands in case you would like to ask a question to Baldassare. It would be nice to hear about aquaculture experience in your region, in your area. Is this? I see Livio. Please go ahead.
Many thanks, Professor. Actually, really interesting. You mentioned several times being all this a prototype.
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced any implementation? Have you ever experienced any kind of projects for cooperation abroad? I mean, international cooperation. I mean, implementing all this in a faraway country like in Africa, for example. Anything like that? Thank you. This is my question. Thank you.
Yes, this kind of project, the Synta project in particular, is really quite innovative. We are right now at the end of the project. We have been working 3 years, let's say 4 years due to the COVID, and we had delayed the deadline of the project. So we are going to end at the end of May, just now. This project is still to a very early stage because we are just testing the biological idea that underlie the production. Okay, so we have been doing some tests to understand if the fish may be grown with this kind of feeds, and we have been studying the efficiency of the detritivorous filter feeders production, and of course the crop production in these conditions. We have been applying this approach, let's say, to marine aquaculture, because in our idea, marine aquaculture may provide very large expectations. We have a large expectation from marine aquaculture, many opportunities. That's why at the moment just a few countries from Europe have been involved, but we had a partner from Turkey. But in the past, I had an experience with the Coventry University and an university in Burkina Faso, applying an aquaponic system, a small-scale aquaponic system for production in a community, very small community, with the idea of implementing a larger scale, let's say large-scale aquaponic production within the refugees camp. And this might be really important, relevant to make refugees to improve the life conditions in the refugees camp. This was a project in cooperation with the Coventry University. Yeah, there are large opportunities, because if we talk about aquaponic, we have knowledge, we are aware of, we are confident to be able to produce something concrete and sustainable. We can produce food for human consumption through the aquaponic system. The Syntap is still something ongoing. Okay, we need to make more steps and to, let's say, more properly balance the size of the different sections. I mean, so far within our prototype, we didn't have enough production for the detritivorous filter feeders to have a significant fish production, but we had a significant crop production. Okay, so that's why in the next step we should make a larger detrivorous filter feeder section utilizing new organisms in order to improve the biomass production per unit of surface. This is next step. So that's why we are not yet ready to jump into the commercial production.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Baldassare. Livia, do you have further questions? Livia, do you have any comments?
Thanks, Rosa Laura. But maybe somebody else has something to say.
Yes,
I'm okay. Thank you.
I see Domenico raising his hand. Please, Domenico, over to you.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Professor, I am from Cairo. I'm listening from Cairo. First of all, I must say I checked the simtap.eu website, and the location of Egypt is disallowed, so I cannot enter in the. Is that normal or?
Yeah, I think Egypt is one of the countries that can apply for Prima project.
Yeah, that's why
yeah.
I would like to ask you
Sure.
if you can tell the web manager to maybe just a glitch that I cannot open from here, not from the office, neither from my personal computer, because it would be interesting to see more of the project. Actually, in Egypt, there is interest in aquaculture,
Sure.
and the cooperation to development, the Italian cooperation to development, made some education center for fish aquaculture. So it would be nice if we could continue talking with you, and maybe Director Spadavecchia, I may after contact Professor Fronte, because it would be interesting. You are not, as you explained, you are not in a stage of technological transfer, but probably you may get closer with an extra step with more dialogue with the fishery centers that could be interested to try to go on prototype.
Sure, of course.
I think it's a good idea.
In the case of Egypt may participate to the research project as well.
Yeah.
So, as a member of a team member of a research project of the let's say what's the name? Okay,
the consortium.
Yeah, the consortium, right?
It would be a good opportunity.
Can be part of the consortium, of course. So, it's my idea to apply again, because the idea is really interesting, let's say. So I will consider also if you can send me an email, or I will look for you, we can try to get in touch and to talk and to establish a kind of dialogue, as you said, and to see what can come.
Okay, thank you very much.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. And while I see there is a question in the chat, or a few questions in the chat, one is from Clemence Chloé. She's asking, or is asking, if there is any risk of eutrophisation with the aquaponic system, or what is the surface required for the growth of fish. And I think this is a key problem when we talk about aquaculture, the problem of using a lot of chemical, a lot of antibiotics. So perhaps this is of interest of many. So Baldassare, over to you.
Yes, about the use of antibiotics in the aquaculture, this is a very hot topic, and maybe in some countries there is a larger use of antibiotics, but not everywhere. Anyway, what is important is that in a approach such as aquaponic or the Syntap approach, we cannot use antibiotics or other kind of chemicals for plants or for fish, because if we use such products, we can create damages to the plants or to the fish. So if we use pesticides for plants, we kill the fish and the detritivores filter feeders, for instance. No? So this is not allowed. But we have other advantages, because in the case of plants, we are using soilless cultivation. In the soilless cultivation, a lot of parasites cannot grow, cannot make their life cycle, so they cannot grow. And from a fish side, we are using a closed loop, totally closed loop. And except for the starting, when we take the juveniles, introduce the juveniles in the system, there is no way other diseases can come into the loop. Okay, if we, of course, follow a very good practice of production. So we don't need to use antibiotics if we start from healthy fish. Okay, and eutrophication, it's really, really important. Yes, you can get phenomena of eutrophication just in case your management of the system is not appropriate. If you introduce a too high load of fish biomass, for instance, you can get eutrophication. But if you have a properly balanced plant section, the nitrogens can be absorbed by the plants, and you can maintain the nitrogen level stable at a threshold which do not allow eutrophication processes. And this is the same for phosphorus and other kind of components.
Thank you very much, Baldassare. Clemence, I hope this reply is satisfying your question. And while we were having this discussion, I just learned that the next FAO World Food Day, which is basically celebrating every year the birthday of FAO on 16th of October, will be devoted to water. And the slogan is "Water is life, water is food." I'm just quoting, but I should be something like this. So, so very, very relevant for our work. So water is life, water is food.
Sure.
And of course, working for the Mountain Partnership, I would like to highlight that most water is coming from mountains. So just that so we can close the circle. So thank you very much. I don't see any other hand. So I guess we can take our quick coffee break. But before that, I really would like to thank Baldassare Fronte for his very interesting lesson. Thank you so much for providing this very relevant overview. And we hope to be able to stay in touch and continue this discussion. So the next speaker is Paolo Sertoli. He is the head of the Maputo office of the Italian Development Corporation. He will start his lessons at 4:20, so we have 10 minutes for a quick coffee break, and so see you here in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. The lesson is going to be kindly provided by Paolo Enrico Sertoli. He's the head of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation in the Maputo Regional Office. I have seen that Paolo has a very broad experience on water management that he has acquired through different courses in many different locations, and he has also worked for the Italian Overseas Agronomic Institute and other relevant organizations. So is sharing with us information about the Italian approach to water management, and we are very interested to hear about your presentation, as you are based in a very interesting region in Africa, and I'm sure you that through the case studies that you will be sharing, we will learn a lot about what's happening at the moment and how the situation is evolving. So thank you very much, Paolo, and over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rosa Laura. Let me first of all thank the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and of course FAO with its Forestry Division and the University of Torino for giving to the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation this opportunity in order to share some information dealing with our day-to-day work. My name is Paolo Sertoli. I'm the head of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation and Regional Office in Maputo, Mozambique. And before coming to this posting, I was based in Rome within our agency, within our Department of Rural Development and Food Security. In fact, I'm an agriculture engineer by training with a specialization on tropical environment and moreover on water management in agriculture. So basically, within these two classes we're going to have today and tomorrow, I will try to share some information about the approach of the Italian Development Cooperation within the water sector. And then tomorrow, I will share with you some practical examples on how do we formulate and identify programs and intervention within the water management sector. So today I will share with you some information, some basic information about water management, and I will present to you some of the features of the Italian Development Cooperation guidelines on water. And then tomorrow we will go more in details with some examples of water management in developing countries. So if you allow me, I will share the presentation. Just a second. So I hope everybody is able to see the presentation right now.
Yes, very well. Thank you.
So just briefly, the main contents of the presentation as per today. So we're going to have an introduction, a thematic introduction about the water management, with some information about water access, water food energy nexus, and some examples of water crisis. We will make a very short reference to the international water law. We will focus also on some information about climate, so climate and water. And then I will present to you some of the features of the Italian Development Cooperation guidelines on water management. Then we will have a Q&A session, 5 to 10 minutes. So just an introduction about what's the importance of water, of course, in all ecosystems. This is something we as development cooperation agencies focus very much within our interventions. So as you know, just 2.5% is represented by fresh water. So it means that the amount of water that is easily accessible to population is really low. And of course, it's very much, pardon me, it's very much important also to underline that only a few countries, a few regions in the world have the majority of renewable water resources. You can see here just 13 countries out of 177 held roughly 65% of the world renewable water resources. Of course, those countries are the one with an higher surface, but of course, it's something that should be taken into consideration, especially for developing actors. You can see here in this picture is a very clear OECD graph, which is underlining how was in the situation in 2000 and how it will be the situation in 2050. So this is an important information for us working in development cooperation, since it's enabling us also to focus maybe our strategy on some sectors and not on other sectors. So you see the situation is very different from OECD countries to, for example, BRICS countries, where, for example, for OECD countries, we're going to have a reduction, is expected at least, a reduction in water demand for irrigation, due especially to the adoption of more efficient irrigation techniques and methods. But for example, you can see in BRICS countries, where especially due to livestock, manufacturing and electricity, the water demand is expected to rise. Of course, this is something very important also for national politics in order to understand which are the sectors where they want to focus their strategies in order to mitigate the problems that they could face in order to respect the water demand by population. Another important issue, of course, is the population growth. Here you have some information and projection to 2030 about world population growth. And I just underlined 3 areas of interest, especially for the Italian development cooperation, but mainly by all development agencies. So you can see that, for example, the rural population is expected to rise very much, especially in Africa. So from 1970, last century, until 2030 is expected to rise very much. So this is something that should be taken into consideration by policymakers in order to understand which are the strategies that they want to implement in their own countries. And also it's very much important to focus on the urban population, where you can see that numbers are really high in 2030, especially in Africa and Asia, where the population is expected to rise very much. This is another important information related to water withdrawal and population. So you can see this is an Aquastat graph. I believe the colleagues from FAO know very much this tool that have been elaborated by FAO, that is very much useful, especially for those working in the water sector. So you can see this graph is a little bit old already, so it comes from 2014, if I'm not wrong. But you can see, of course, there is a relation between the population and the water withdrawal over the last decade. So these are all information that we take into consideration when we do have to identify some interventions in the water sector. Another important issue is poverty and its relationship with the water resources. Of course, countries where the populations have less access to water, and of course, when we talk about less access, we do think about both physical and economic access to water. Tomorrow we will be underlining the difference in between the 2 accesses of water. Especially our low-income countries and especially in rural areas. So there is a very important nexus in between poverty and access to water resources. And this is particularly true, especially in sub-Saharan Africa and Eastern and Southern Asia. I just wanted to focus on some countries. I believe many participants to this webinar comes from Africa. So I wanted to underline the situation in 4 countries. So one of them is Ethiopia, then we have Mozambique, Niger, and Nigeria. So these 4 countries have less than expected, I would rather say, amount of population accessing to water resources, and are one of the countries where the population is higher, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, especially with Nigeria and Ethiopia, which have very high numbers in population in some regions of the countries. So you can see how it will be it's very important for policymakers to underline this information, because of course they would need to plan some strategies for developing their own regions according to the poverty of the region. This is also a very important picture coming from WHO and UNICEF from 2006. The information, of course, is still quite valid at this very time. So you can see which are the countries with less access to improved water sources. Most of them, as you can see, are, of course, in sub-Saharan Africa, and somehow it's very interesting to have this information very clear in mind, especially when we have to plan new interventions dealing with water sectors. Of course, we are talking about improved water sources, so it means that the water should be of an high quality in order to serve especially for human consumption, of course. You can see the main problems are related to sub-Saharan Africa. Another very important concept is the nexus. Of course, this is something that we do discuss already almost 10 years now, more than 10 years, when in the Bonn conference, these nexus have been, I would say, characterized better. So, of course, there is a very important link in between the three dimensions of security. And you can see on your right, the three dimensions: water security, energy security, and food security, where water is a central variable of these three securities. So in order to have these three dimensions of the security, which are the main aspects of an economy, I would rather say, it's very much important to have access to water. And access, I repeat, is something that is dealing with economic and feasible access of the resources. This is particularly true because we have a very important population growth and urbanization, especially in some countries, in developing countries. So this is some regions, of developing countries. So the pressure is growing on natural resources. Of course, when I name natural resources, I not only name water, but I also name soil and biodiversity, which are the main three natural resources. This is also another important data, I would say, so related to the nexus, where we have only 2.5 billion people with access to electricity and only 2.8 billion that live in areas with high water stress. This is very important because, of course, roughly 1/3 of the world population is living in countries and better in areas characterized by water stress that somehow is also affecting the economy of the countries. It's also very important to briefly have an overview about what does access and control of water resources mean. And when we talk about control of water resources, we do have to focus especially on shared watersheds. In this presentation, I tried to give some examples, and we will take a look after to these examples I wanted to share with you. But of course, it's very important to underline that the transpondary river basin management is having a very high importance, and it will be very much important also in the future. Because of course, the water demand, especially for agriculture, will increase. especially in countries where we do work, for example, and of course the surface water resources will not. So of course it's something that should be taken into consideration. And of course the resource, especially when it's transboundary, if it's not managed correctly, it could cause very conflicts, both at local and international level. So, as I was mentioning before, the cross-border management of water resources could also determine some benefits, such, for example, the international trade and the economic growth of some region. According to the UN water statistics, there have been roughly 35, 37 conflicts in water management, especially in transboundary water management. And of course, this is something that should be taken into consideration when talking about transboundary water management. This is a map with just some of the most important transboundary watersheds all over the world. You can see many also are in the countries of your origin, I would believe. The ones that really are very important to understand, of course, are the Amazon, the Danube in Europe, of course, the Niger, the Lake Chad, Congo, Nile, Zambezi, just to name some of them in Africa. And also in Asia, in Australia, you can see there are many watershed, transboundary watershed. So this is something very important to be considered, and especially for us working in development cooperation, we have to take into consideration that water is not a resource that is framed within a country, but it could come from other countries. So it should be managed in another perspective, which is not in a regional perspective, I would rather say, than in a national perspective. So later, I'm just giving you some examples of the situation that have been faced in recent times in some areas. I would start with the Lake Chad. I don't know if some of the participants of this webinar comes from that very region, but you may know that the Lake Chad is a very, very important lake located in between 4 countries, which are Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria, and Niger. And this lake is fed by a river. By 95%, roughly 90 to 95% of this water coming from a river, which is the Chari River. In the last years, during a period of 50 years, the lake has shrunk to less than 10% of its size. Of course, this giving a very important impact to all the economies of the countries which are sharing this important lake. And this shrinking is due especially to the decrease of rainfall in the area, which we have to recall is an area characterized by arid and semi-arid climates, and of course by the extensive and not sustainable use of water for irrigation. So I wanted just to share with you a picture from UNEP, so from the Atlas of Our Changing Environment, which is a very important document dealing with climate change, but especially with natural resources. So you can see how's the situation from 1972 until 2007, where you have especially the western part of the lake, which is basically dry. Another situation in another area is the Aral Sea. As you may know, it was, I would say, one of the most important lakes in the world. And in 2014, it's one of the two basins completely dried up. So you can see the situation, how it was in the 1970s and how it was in 2014. The withdrawal from this lake began over a century ago, when the Soviet Union authorized to divert the two major rivers that were feeding the lake, especially for water irrigation purposes and especially for cotton production. Of course, you can imagine how the situation is now for all the countries and economy of this region. Then some other cases also in other regions. You can see the Tigris-Euphratic Basin. I don't know if participants from Iran or Iraq are participating to this webinar, but this is a very important issue, especially from the countries which were taking advantage of the Tigris and Euphrates Basin. Another important basin is the Jordan Basin, where you have many countries involved, and of course the situation especially in the Dead Sea is not very promising, I would rather say, especially for the agricultural production, since there is less water than it was, so not very much production can be enhanced, taking advantage of the water coming from the Jordan Basin. And last but not least, another case in Africa, which is the Okavango Basin, which is, as you know, there are 4 countries that are taking advantage of this basin, and also in this basin we are facing big problems, especially for the some disputes also involving the Republic of South Africa. So this is just for giving you some examples of the most important basins that also we do have to consider, especially when we have to identify and formulate some cooperation initiatives. Just a very short reference to the international water law. This is just for making you understand how complicated is let's say the sector, also from an international point of view. I just tried to summarize some of the most important dates and declarations that have been produced in recent years on water, starting from, of course, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is, of course, enunciate the right of life, which is implicitly only also considering the dimension of the access to fresh water. Also, some very important dates on the debate are the UN Water Conference. The last UN Water Conference of Water been as you may know, in March to this year, and it was the very first water conference after the 1977 Mar del Plata Water Conference. So this year water conference has been very much important in order to refresh, let me say, the importance of this issue in the international debate. Also very much important to underline the UN Action Decade. We are actually within the 10 years of the Water Action Decade that have been created by the UN from 2018 until 2028. So this is also very important. Of course, the resolutions, you see the most important, I would say, resolution dated 2010 affirm that the right to water and sanitation are part of existing international law, and of course those are therefore are legally legally binding. So this is just to give you some a flash about which are the most important conferences and dates on when we deal about water and water security. And this is very much important to take into consideration, especially as international development cooperation and dealing with the water sector. Just briefly also underline the importance of the International Agreement on Climate. As you know, in 2015, there have been the 21st Conference of Parties to the Convention on Climate Change, so the COP21, and it has been adopted the Paris Agreement in the framework of this conference, which is very much important not only for climate change, but it's very much important also for water. And I will go there later. The objective of the protocol, as you may know, is to help stabilize the concentration of greenhouse gases at a level, I quote, such as to avoid dangerous interference of anthropic origin with the climate system. Of course, water has been one of the main aspects covered during the conference, and also because as you all know, precipitation is very much influenced by climate change and, of course, extreme weather. We do face also in this very country, Mozambique, we are facing some important climate change events, especially floods and droughts, and of course also fluctuation in water temperature, and all these phenomena that contribute to the availability of especially fresh water. So during the Conference of Parties in Paris in 2015, it has been adopted an act. So the Paris Pact, you can see, on water and climate change adaptation, which is a very important tool, I would say, in order to mitigate some of the effects that could be created by the climate change to water availability. And this pact that have been presented during the COP21 represent roughly 20 billion in technical assistance and potentially 1 billion in funds and market for water and climate change adaptation. So this is very, very important commitment by the international community in order to mitigate some of the effects of climate change, especially in developing countries. As you see, the pact involves many actors, both at governmental level, business and private sector, civil society, and all the stakeholders that are very much linked with the water sector worldwide. I just wanted to extract some information about some programs that have been introduced within this pact. You can see here 3 programs in 3 very different regions. You can see in the Indonesia basin, so with roughly 10 to 9 countries involved. It was a program to launch a 10 years investment in order to strengthen resilience to climate change, especially in water sector related to agriculture. You can see another program which is currently implemented in Jordan, but also Lebanon, the Principality of Monaco, Morocco, Spain, and Tunisia, especially focused on the Mediterranean water platform in order to access the state water resources in the area. Within the previous presentation, the lecturer focused the importance of having a very important focus on the Mediterranean area when dealing with the water resources, especially in aquaculture, of course, but is dealing with the water sector in general. Last but not least, another program based in South America with some financial mechanisms for climate change adaptation in some river basins that have been supported by the European Commission. So this is basically to give you some information about the environment that as development actors we do have to face on our day-to-day work, and this is something that we do have to take into consideration when identify some interventions. So we have to take into consideration technical aspects related to the sectors itself, but of course we have to take into consideration also other aspects which are dealing with, I would rather say, a more general aspects related to water resources. And this is exactly the information that have been used in order to elaborate some guidelines of the actual guidelines for Italian development cooperation within the water sector that have been issued in 2015 by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. Of course, Italy, as you may know, has a very important tradition in the conservation and also in management of water resources, especially in rural area. And as this webinar testifies, we do have a very important technical and scientific expertises in all the sectors related to water management. And of course, within the intervention that have been carried out in Italy, we do tackle all the aspects of water resources. So going from agriculture until wash, until industrial and civil uses of the resources. Just to give you some information very quickly about the commitment of the Italian development cooperation within the water sector, let me start by indicates which are the so-called priority countries where the Italian development cooperation is currently working. So according to the very last guidelines that we do share with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. You can see here in this slide, we actually have the 20 priority countries. Most of them are, of course, in Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, but we also have some other countries, especially Middle East and Asia. You can see here the list. Of course, according to the especially climate situation of the country, but of course also based on the expertise that the country is able to make a disposal to the intervention, there could be like different kind of interventions in these areas. Actually, according to these variables, the Italian development cooperation has promoted intervention in different sectors according to the expertise and especially the climate of the region. So you can see here just a few examples of the commitment of the Italian development cooperation in some regions. I would rather start with the Mediterranean area, where you see here listed some of the countries where we do actually work. And in these very countries, particular emphasis have been historically focused on the water resource, especially for drinking use and wash, rather than for agriculture, for example. In the Far East, especially in Bangladesh, India, and Vietnam, in Vietnam is a country where we keep working in present times. intervention are almost aimed at the prevention of, of increasing water for drinking purposes and of course for water and sanitation. In Saharan Africa, just listing some of the countries where we are still working, so Mali, Niger, Senegal and Sudan, the intervention are mostly on use on water resources for civil use, but we also have some intervention related to the revitalization of some semi-arid areas in state of degradation. This is a very important issue, which is also covered by the guidelines I was referring to. So the use of water in order to revitalize some areas that have been compromised to especially non-sustainable use of water in agriculture. Another very important context is sub-Saharan Africa, and I listed here some three countries which are very important, especially for the agricultural water use, which are Ethiopia, Kenya, and Mozambique. In these countries, it's very much important the wash sector, but of course, it's very much important also the irrigation sector, since water is accessible, or climate, these countries are characterized, especially some regions, by very high precipitations during the whole year, but sometimes the irrigation sector is not very well performing. So the methods and the techniques that are used are not covering the expectations from the local government. And of course, also in Latin America, still we have some intervention, especially dealing with the governance of water, especially through participatory management of the local community. I was mentioning the guidelines that have been issued in 2015. This is a document that we still use as a reference, especially us on the on regional offices, which that we are in charge for identifying and formulating the initiatives. So this is a document that we still take into consideration when dealing with water sector. And as I was mentioning before, there are three subsectors of intervention. The first, and I would say maybe the most important one, is the water for human and civil use. And you also have reference to the WASH, so water and sanitation and hygiene. But we also have some other two important sectors of these guidelines. They are water for agricultural uses, and as I was referring to, is water for protection or recovery of the aquifers. So the guidelines are very much useful because they do cover most of the project cycle management, and they also refer to some of the indicators that could be used in water management in interventions, especially dealing with developing countries, with a particular focus on sub-Saharan Africa. These are just a few examples of intervention that we are implementing in two different contexts, also with two contexts of very different climate. The very first one on your left, I suppose, is in Khartoum, in Sudan, and on your right, you can see in Kabul. These are two contexts, and we will cover this issue tomorrow during our lecture tomorrow. Two different climates, and taking into consideration the very different climates, of course, it should be important to focus on different kind of interventions, which are in a need assessment approach, more useful and effective for the local population. With this, I conclude my presentation for today. If there are questions, I'm available for answering. And I thank you very much for the attention. Thank you.
Paolo, we thank you for this very, very interesting overall presentation about what's happening in, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, but an overview of the water situation around the world. And this is particularly relevant because, as I was saying before, the next World Food Day will be devoted to water is life, water is food. And also because the Mountain Partnership Secretariat, where I worked, is also promoted by the Italian Development Corporation, that is somehow also protecting the water towers, the water sources. So this is all somehow linked together in a very strategic manner. So really, congratulations for this very good presentation. I see that also in the chat, people are congratulating you. I don't know if someone has raised his hand. Can you please stop your sharing the screen, because it's easier for me to see if there are questions. I don't see any hands, but perhaps we can allow for a few more minutes so people can make up their minds and see if they have any specific questions that they would like to ask. From my side, I think it's no. We have seen that a lot of important lakes that we are aware, like have been shrinking during the last decades, and but we also have seen that water efficiency can be improved, and through improving water efficiency, you can really somehow revert the situation. Of course, the extraction of water is a key problem, especially when the water sources are not clear and when the management of transboundary water is not well defined. So I think that the transboundary cooperation and the alliances and all these protocols or agreements that do exist are providing good, at least in theory, good basis for transboundary management. But I would be interested in seeing if these documents, these agreements are just on paper or if they really work in reality. How you see that as you're based in the center of the problem.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your question. Actually, most of the countries which are facing water problems are nowadays a little bit more sensitive to the issue, especially if compared with the past. We see this issue, especially in countries and areas characterized by arid and semi-arid climates, where, of course, the water resources are scarce. So countries are a little bit more sensitive to this issue as it was in the past, especially because, as I was mentioning in one of the slides, there have been many events and declarations on water in the last decades. So, of course, also the conference that have been held this year in New York, it has been a very important milestone for the water sector, since, as I was mentioning, it was the very first UN Water Conference after 1977. So, of course, there is very much pressure on the water sector nowadays, and most of the countries are a little bit more sensitive. Then it's a very good question if they're passing from the paper to the action, but somehow they are trying to do, especially again, countries which are facing problems with I would rather say physical access to water more than economical access. We will focus on that tomorrow during the practical presentation. But of course, countries where the precipitation are scarce are, of course, more sensitive to the problem. I hope that in the next future, the situation will improve. So many countries also in Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa will be even more sensitive on the issue.
Thank you, Paolo. I see that Livio has a question. Please, Livio.
Many thanks, Dr. Sertoli. Absolutely very interesting presentation. Thanks a lot. From the image you have shown, well, as far as I understood, there is an approach more targeting rural areas. Have you got as a AIX any experience in a urban context as far as water management is concerned, which is not just irrigation, I understand. It's pretty much difficult managing water in a urban areas where you have to deal with planning, urban planning. I mean, I understand. But have you got any experience about that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Spadavecchia, for the question. Actually, within the water sector, we do identify two very broad sense, two very subsectors. So water and agriculture and water for civil and industrial use. So of course, when we deal with civil and industrial use, we mostly focus on urban areas. And we do have many experiences, especially in Middle East. So I was mentioning some of the countries in the Middle East where we very much focused on civil use of water. So you were mentioning, for example, wastewater reuse, which is a very important issue. I will make reference to this tomorrow. So we are very much focused on the trying to mitigate the effects of the water pollution in order to make the resource more usable for people. And this is very much true, especially in the Middle East. But we have other experiences I was mentioning within the presentation in also Saharan Africa and Tunisia, for example, especially in the reuse of wastewater resources for agriculture, which is something very important for the water sector in general. Depending on the area, our cooperation is focusing on one sector more than another, especially because we do have to deal with the local expertise. So you know that the situation, of course, in Middle East with local expertise, treating, for example, for the treatment of wastewater is very much higher than other countries where still this is not very much on, I would say, top of the shelf as a priority of the government. So we do have many regions in the globe where still we have some problem with, for example, arsenicum in the water. So we have pollution in the water, and still this water is used for human consumption without the population having knowledge about the presence in the water of pollutant. So you can see the situation is very much is a scattered situation according to the area of implementation of the initiatives. We do focus on a sector more than another. But still, yes, we have many activities in the sector that we could eventually share also this information. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Paolo.
Thank you.
Livio, any comment from you?
I'm okay, thanks.
Okay, I don't see any other question. We still have a few minutes. Oh, I see Amal. Please, Amal, you have the floor.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Would you explain to me what is Italian cooperation in Egypt exactly? Thank you. In Cairo, definitely. Thank you.
You mean in the water sector, or generally speaking,
Yes,
the
water
cooperation
sector? Yes, in the water sector.
Within the water sector, we do have many initiatives, especially in the agricultural sector. We do have some important initiatives dealing with mechanization within agriculture, and we do have some components also dealing with irrigation, so mechanization in irrigation, especially dealing with irrigation techniques. So we are trying to push in the direction of having more efficient irrigation techniques and methods in order to save water. So passing, for example, from surface to drip and sprinkler irrigation, it would be a strategy in order to save water. But we do have some initiatives. In any case, we could eventually put you in contact with our regional office in El Cairo if you wish to have some more information about these initiatives. Our colleagues in El Cairo would be very much willing to answer to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Your office in Cairo exactly, or in
Maputo?
Exactly. We do have a regional office in El Cairo as well. I'm based in Maputo. Me, myself, I'm based in Maputo, Mozambique. But we do have an office in El Cairo as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I saw Tefera raising his hand. Would you still like to have a question, or you are set?
Very short question. May I proceed?
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Polo, for your nice presentation. You mentioned some transponder issues, but I would like also to hear your comments on the Nile basin. That's also one of the transponder issues that and Egypt, of course. Also, there are also some other countries that share the water, but the main problem is between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. Do you have some information or do you have some comments? Because as you know, of the water, about 5% of the Nile source is Ethiopia. But the share is 25% for Sudan, and for about 75% is for Egypt, without considering the main source, Ethiopia. Still, Egyptian want to issue. Of course, there are transponder principles that should be implemented, and there are also, of course, this have been discussing for a very long period of time. But we have some comments. Also, I would like to hear comments from other participants. Thank you very much.
Paolo, did you manage to understand the question? Because the line was a bit disturbed for me.
Yeah, a bit disturbed.
But I think the topic was clear.
Yeah, I just want to confirm if I understood well. So the participant wanted to have a comment on the Nile situation, given the fact that roughly 70% of water is allocated to Egypt. I don't know if the comment should be from myself or from other participants. I didn't get this point, but in case I could share some points.
Paolo, please go ahead, and then if others would like to complement, that would be great. Please.
Okay, thank you very much. I didn't mention on purpose within the presentation the situation in the Nile River basin, because it's one, I would say, of the more complicated we do have, at least in Africa. So I will just focus on the technical issue without consider the political issue, because we all know that there are some treaties which are covering the situation in the Nile Basin River. But from the technical point of view, I totally agree with the situation that have been presented by the participant. Actually, Egypt is receiving 70% of the water of the Nile River, which, as you may know, is two rivers actually. So it's two rivers going in one river, and the higher quantity of water, so the higher discharge, is coming from a river passing through Ethiopia. Ethiopia has developed in the recent times important infrastructures in order to, especially for electricity production. They recently concluded the works of the GERD, which is one of the most important hydroelectric programs worldwide, in order to especially covering the demand of electricity in Ethiopia. So I see the problem that have been raised by the participant. We could maybe spend the whole day discussing about situation in the Nile River basin. So if you wish, we could maybe organize another webinar focus on this issue. But in any case, yeah, the situation is not very easy, especially for Ethiopia, Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. I don't see other hands, but correct me if I'm wrong. Just shout or take the floor. I don't see other hands. Oh, there is a question in the chat. It says, "Good afternoon, and thanks for the great presentation. I would like to understand if due to some lakes getting droughty, are new lakes arising?
Sorry, I didn't get the question.
You
Is
can
it
read it in, yeah, it's not very clear to me. I would like to understand if some lakes, if due to some lakes getting droughty, are new lakes arising? Okay, if this the when we lose lakes, other lakes are appearing, or but I think, well, you go ahead. You are the expert.
I don't know if I get the question, but of course, this is a very technical question. So of course, if you have some, especially surface water resources that they get dry, of course you can have others that are not. But this is very much related to the climate pattern of the region. So I was mentioning some of the crises we are facing present times. Most of them are focused on in countries and areas where the climates are mostly arid and semi-arid. Of course, in those climates, due to evaporation, most of the water is lost through the surface or from the surface of water. Other situation where the climate pattern is different, and you do have more water within the ecosystem, I would rather say, of course, lakes would rise. So I don't know if this was the question, if I understood well the question, but it's very much related to the climate pattern of the area, and of course, the sustainable use of the water resources that the population make use of it.
Yes, the question was from Raul Manuel Nanombe from Mozambique, I think. I hope this reply. So, as you said, Paolo, it's a very complex and also site-specific issue, and it's very difficult to answer in a generic way and provide an overall reply. But indeed, the hydrological cycle, the changing climate, the local extraction, there are all factors that, of course, have to be considered. But we are almost there. So if there are no other questions, I would like to thank again the great two speakers that we had today. And I would like to say that tomorrow we will have Paolo again with us, and we are really thankful for this. And the second lecture will be from Luca Lucentini and Valentina Fuscoletti. We hope you can join again. And Paolo, you
yeah, just sorry for interrupting you, but actually the purpose, especially for tomorrow, it will be really to get some information from the countries of the participants in order to enable us also to get some information from the countries. So we would like, especially the hour we're going to spend together tomorrow, to be very much interactive, in order to collect some ideas on possible intervention that could be also focused within our next programming phases. Thank you very much.
This is a very key point, because one of the purposes of this webinar is exactly to come up with joint proposals to be submitted to potential prospective donor to really tackle this issue around the world. So come prepared, bring your ideas, and we really look forward to hearing from you all and define initiatives and activities to deal with this world crisis. So thank you very much. Paolo, thanks again. And we look forward to meeting you all tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Grazie, buonasera.
Ciao, buonasera.
شكرا.
Grazie, Shukra.
Shukran, shukran.
Thank you, Paolo.